do have to start looking at the deeper claims. It's not just this like fix all, like we have succession, we're the one true church. You can't just stop at those claims. There's a lot more that goes into it.
Welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name is Javier Perdomo. This channel is a place where, as I say at the beginning of every video, I just like to put up my musings and conversations and sometimes presentations from myself and others on theological matters and matters of church history, on matters of apologetics. Thus far, we've been mainly doing Protestant apologetics, defending Protestantism and defending or hearing defenses from other people about particular traditions. In the future, I'm sure we'll have some more just general like cultural apologetics and other kinds of apologetics going on. But this is a matter that is near and dear to my heart because it's an issue that I struggled with just a couple of years ago, right? I was struggling heavily with Roman Catholicism and with the pull to what we would say are like the ecclesialist traditions, right? Like Rome and the East. And it's something that I had a lot of anxiety over. And it's something that I know there's a lot of other people that have anxiety over and ecclesial anxiety over these things, whether you're in the right church or not. And so one of the things that I like to do on my channel is to try to plug in the holes where I see them in the Protestant apologetic scene. And one of those holes that I've seen is not a complete lack of testimonies. I know some pretty good testimonies out there of people that have, for example, left Eastern Orthodoxy, like Joshua Shuping or Will Wheaton on the Lutheran side. Well, he didn't leave Eastern Orthodoxy, but he struggled with it and then remained a Lutheran. But there's not as many stories as I would like to see out there, right? We don't have our equivalent of the Coming Home Network on the Roman Catholic side or EWTN. And so I'm not saying that my channel will be exclusively that, but as many people as I can find that either used to be Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox and are now Protestant, or who once struggled with those things, like I struggled with them, I want to be able to platform their stories and for you to be able to hear a little bit of who they are, what they have to say, and then, a conversation that ensues between us about these issues. And I think it'll be helpful. If you're someone that's struggling with this stuff, I think it'll be helpful for you to hear what other people that struggled with it and came out the other side of Protestant I have to say. And if you've never struggled with this stuff, I'm sure you'll find it interesting to hear out the perspective of someone who has. And so along those lines, I have my good friend here, Kevin. If you hear me call him Indig, that's a screen name on on the server we're both a part of. Hey, if you want to talk to either one of us after this, you can go check out the server. I'm pretty sure I always keep the link down in the description. The Striving Side-by-Side server, you can see me or you can see Kevin or Indig if you join the server. But how are you doing, Kevin?
Doing well.
Doing pretty well. So, hey, I'm excited for this conversation. I've been looking forward to this one. I feel like I look forward to all the interviews that I do on the channel, but I mean, we talk a lot, and I consider us pretty good friends in the online world, since we haven't met in person yet. But I'm just excited to talk to a friend and to get to talk about something that I think we both care a lot about. But before we jump into that, and before we jump into your story, why don't you tell everybody at home just a little bit about yourself before we get into that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Kevin. I'm 30 years old. I'm currently a pre-seminary student. I'm part of the LCMS, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And yeah, I'm in my last year until, I have to start deciding if I'm going to seminary or not, but so far, still just going through a theology major. And yeah, that's about it.
Cool. All right. So before I keep rambling on, I'm going to go ahead and subtract myself here from the equation and let you tell us your story about how you came to Christ, how you were confronted with the claims of Rome, what it was like dealing with those claims, and a little bit about how you came out the other side of that a Lutheran. And then we'll explore that more in depth afterward. And so I'll remove myself from here and give you the floor.
Yeah, so as a Lutheran, I came to Christ when I was baptized as a baby. It's I guess not a huge story about my conversion or anything. Just that's when my walk as a Christian, I guess, started. I grew up in the LCMS church. I was pretty active throughout my whole upbringing. I was in like the youth group, worship band through high school. Did the confirmation in middle school. All through Sunday school, that kind of stuff. I guess through high school, towards kind of the second half of high school, um, I stopped going to church regularly. It was kind of like once you finish confirmation, it's kind of like you fulfilled your obligation, so you just you're not obligated to go anymore. But I was also looking towards joining the military, and kind of just set my sights on that. My senior year of high school, I signed up in the delayed entry program for the Marines, and then that's where like maybe once a week you're working with a recruiter, exercising, just preparing to go to boot camp. So yeah, then I fully enlisted the summer or the fall after I graduated high school, um, and I was an Arabic linguist for 5 years. Um, so I guess having a um, yeah, that was kind of the start of coming back into the church. Just being in the military, you're kind of more faced with the world in general. Even I wasn't in combat. I did deploy, but just kind of being around diverse groups of people, um, and then deploying to a Muslim country and seeing kind of this particular country. It was essentially illegal to not be Muslim, and seeing that even though it was required to be Muslim, they still skirted the rules. So many of them like didn't really follow Islam more than they had to. Um, it kind of made me look more at my faith. And up until then, I guess I had gotten into watching a few different YouTubers, um, Lutheran pastors that were making content kind of in the earlier days of online apologetics. This would have been, I don't know, maybe 2013, 2014, that range. Um, but yeah, that was kind of the first time I started seeing what a Lutheran was. I had been raised Lutheran. Everything I was taught was solid, doctrinally Lutheran teaching, but it was just presented as like this is what the gospel is. It was never in comparison to other traditions. So I really didn't get that distinction until I started getting back into theology. Um, it was I guess at that point there's not really any doubt. It was more just like this is what I believe, and then here's how it compares to these other things. And through that comparison, you kind of learn more about what you believe. Um, but then, yeah, I guess I still wasn't really active in the church through my time in the military, or even for years afterwards. It was still just getting more and more into the theology. Um, but then with that, I got into online apologetics, kind of that sphere. Um, a lot of that's just in like getting into fights and comment sections, uh, but also a lot of watching debates. I think instead of just consuming content, like hearing what one person has to say, a lot of times it's better to watch two people clashing, seeing two ideas come together, and which one makes more sense, has better evidence, is more logically sound. Um, so yeah, that became kind of one of my main pastimes for years, and kind of still is today. Um, but then I'd say handful of years ago, just certain life events started kind of nudging me in the direction of like maybe I'm being called to ministry. That maybe I shouldn't just be in comment sections, um, but maybe I should actually take all this stuff I've learned, the stuff I've read, and get an official, university education. Um, so that's when I started this pre-seminary program. Uh, Things kind of fell into place. I was at a different college studying something totally different, and their classes just happened to fill up for the next ones I needed to continue. So I kind of took a semester gap, applied to my current university. It's an LCMS university, and yeah, the theology degree just happened to match up with their pre-sim, so kind of on that path. But kind of through the past few years, in transitioning to this pastoral call, uh, you have to be more sure of what you believe. It's at least in the LCMS, as a layperson, you maybe technically only have to follow the small catechism, but as a pastor, you have to affirm the whole Book of Concord, plus like synod resolutions, that kind of thing. So I wanted to start making sure I agree with everything in the book that I'm signing up for. And with that came looking into the claims of Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, other Protestant denominations. Is just basics like why do I believe in infant baptism, or why do they not? is probably the important contrast. Just kind of clarifying these important differences. So that got me into other online communities, like the one where I met Javier, which these have just been full of people who know so much more than me. I'm not much of a book reader, so you have people who are just human encyclopedias, but also just coming together with people from all these different traditions, and I guess seeing just how cordial we can all be together. I think part of that helped to confirm my Protestantness. That even though we're divided on important issues, we can still call each other brothers and sisters in Christ. Which, as I found out through studies, some Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox won't call you that. And yeah, it's kind of huge claims that you have to get through when you're investigating these differences. And kind of it probably took maybe a couple years to really be not convinced at all. I was never super strongly worried, except for the initial oh, they think I'm going to hell because I'm not in their church. Um, it You don't have to look too far to see that's not really the truth. Like I said, I can get more into that later, but yeah, that's probably where I am at the moment.
All right. That was awesome. I was acquainted with I would say most of your story, but it's always great for me hearing people kind of compress kind of their life story into 10 minutes and kind of what makes the cut and
Mhm.
what doesn't, and I will say before we even get into some of the questions and kind of back and forth that we had talked about in regards to your story, I just want to say, man, just to echo what you were saying about how cool it is, there are there are plenty of online communities that are, super toxic and, and less than ideal.
Yeah,
But it's great when you can find at least a community that you can be in where you're like, man, yeah, we are all, and the striving side by side Discord, it's like, man, you have Arminian Baptists, you have Reformed Baptists, you have Presbyterians, you have Presbyterians that are really big on the RPW and ones that are not very big on the RPW. You have Lutherans, you have Anglicans. We have all kinds of people. And like you said, sometimes things can get a little bit heated every once in a while, right? When you have enough people together. But overall, it's like seeing the amount of brotherly and sisterly love that everyone has for one another. I think there's something to that lived experience and community that can be
definitely.
just super positive. But I think, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about that later. But we're also going to cover the probably the negative side of other kind of communities and
Mhm.
things that we see online. But before we get to that, right, as you're talking, you said it took you a couple of years to really be fully settled. You said you never for some of us that struggled with this stuff, it's like, man, we woke up thinking about it and we went to bed thinking about it at night. And all these things. That wasn't necessarily the case for you, but it did take you a couple of years of really researching before you're like, okay, I am just fully settled right? And my Lutheranism. And so before you got to that point, though, right, if you go all the way back to the very beginning of your encountering with Rome's claims, right, which of Rome's claims seemed most compelling to you and most troubled you when you first encountered them, right? And then how did you go about evaluating those claims?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the most attractive, and it still is attractive in theory, is just that there is one visible, continuous church.
Yep.
It's identifiable by the succession of bishops from the apostles. Um, this teaching is unchanged. It's been the same forever. It's just this like super objective thing you can look at and be like, this is the one true church. That would be great if it were true. It's I don't even like
Yeah.
I don't have to study theology anymore. I can just study like the the Roman councils, or just follow whatever my priest says. That's because that's going to be, the true faith. Um, but looking into that, you find that that's not the case. There's a I don't know. I mean, first of all, the apostolic succession. There are cases to be made for this being a practice, even going back pretty far back in the church. Um, but as for like a charism that's conveyed,
Mm.
that ensures doctrinal infallibility, essentially, or inerrancy, you don't see that, especially with how there are multiple other denominations that claim the exact same thing,
Yeah.
and they have the exact same evidence for their claim. So it's that they can't all be inerrant. They can't all have this same charism, this protection from error. So there has to be something more distinct than just that.
Yeah.
Um,
Because otherwise, the Oriental Orthodox also have that. They have a claim to
yeah,
that. The Eastern Orthodox have a claim to that. The Roman Catholics have a claim to that. The true Orthodox, right, have a claim to that.
yeah,
And that's, I think, where and this is a word that I'm really hoping for all of us making videos like this, smaller creators and bigger creators, that we can really, and we'll talk about this plenty of times, popularize that term to come up. When we were coming up with a or looking rather for a term that could match that of Protestantism, and it's ecclesialism, which is, man, when you have these institutions that deny sola scriptura, that deny these different solas, and they all have a claim to tradition alongside with scripture being infallible, right? Capital T tradition, at least. They have a claim to, like you're saying, apostolic succession going all the way back. And once you start making these umbrella type groupings, like we did with the word Protestantism with the other side, there's a lot of different institutions that fall under the umbrella of ecclesialism, right?
for sure.
And like you were pointing out, a lot of them with equally seemingly valid claims to apostolic succession, and yet they teach different things, right? They teach different things regarding even basic things, right? Things that seem like nitpicks, but were really big back in the day when it comes to different schisms, right? Things like whether or not priests must have beards, whether or not you have to use leavened or unleavened bread in the supper, whether or not regarding some of the more important schisms, right? What is the nature of when we're talking about Christology, right? And how do we define those things? These are some really significant differences, and yet these institutions with seemingly equally valid claims of apostolic succession landed in different places.
Yeah, it's hard to parse those. It's you do have to start looking at the deeper claims. It's not just this like fix all, like we have succession, we're the one true church. You can't just stop at those claims. There's a lot more that goes into it. And yeah, you mentioned ecclesialism. There's we'll maybe get into this later, but the sola ecclesia people have been using lately. It's the only thing that matters is the church. That's how you determine truth. But then you have to figure out what is the church. What's the definition of the church? But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, there are so many things here that you know, a lot of time we get these big claims with just a lot of presuppositions kind of like built into them, or
Mhm.
like you're saying, a specific definition of what the church even is, right? There's a bunch of stuff that is just built into this. Hey, just listen to us, right, and just listen to what the capital C church has to say on these issues. That goes into that, and it's just it's a theme that I keep finding as I'm talking to, to different people in all these interviews that I'm trying to do for the channel. It's always like, man, a lot of these things sound super nice and they sound super cool, but you can't just leave it at, wow, that sounds awesome, it must be true.
Yeah.
It's like we gotta go in and we gotta actually check it out. And it's interesting because I mean, even if we take, for example, even if we were to, for whatever reason, grant, like, sure, there is a special charism that is passed on. What's fascinating to me is that, I mean, as far as I understand, even for Rome, there's plenty of gaps and holes in the in the list of apostolic successions,
Mhm.
right? That go on. Who was that one Roman Catholic? I believe it was a priest and YouTuber. Was it Father Casey that I think was going over his succession at one point, and they have
Oh,
like
yeah.
of successions, and his succession breaks in like one or two places. They won't argue that it breaks, but they don't know. They have gaps as far as like who transferred it to who,
Yeah.
and like the nitty gritty is really important. When you're making these big claims, and so
Right.
so so
It's
that, that so that was one claim for you that was really like big and compelling. It's like, man, they claim to have this apostolic succession. They claim to have these different things, and there's a lot built into that. So how do you go about actually evaluating the merit of that claim?
um well, so I'd say one thing with succession, like you said, there are gaps. I think something like over 90% of like Roman Catholic priests can only trace their succession back to the Reformation era, like the 16th century. Um, it stops at I think it's a Cardinal Rabiba is the name.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, it's just start looking at these claims. There's anytime someone quotes a church father, like there are a few good websites where you can just look it up. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's a lot of, most of the time with just the state of online apologetics right now, most of the time it takes like a 5 minute Google search and then you see that what they're saying just isn't true, or it's unclear,
Yeah.
or someone else has the exact same evidence like supporting them. So yeah, it's don't just go with, oh, this guy sounds like he knows more than me, so I'm just gonna believe what he's saying. It's
He's
take a
saying it
little bit of time.
right, so he must be right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit more later as well as to what some of these good strategies and good kind of like tips for navigating this sphere online would be. But yes, so that was one big claim for you. Was there any other like really big claim from Rome that when you first encountered it you were like, whoa, that sounds really cool, that sounds really troubling, that you kind of had to like get over?
Um. Well, I guess the succession would be kind of tied to the Pope. Um.
Yeah.
It's like that's what makes Rome Rome. It's kind of what separates them from everyone else, unless you're counting like uh other people who claim they have their own pope. I guess those are factored in.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe the claims to continuity. Um,
Mhm.
I think when a lot of people look at just general Protestantism or even their own traditions,
Yeah.
it seems newer. Um, and that this isn't the case for more like high church Lutherans or like Anglicans, these kinds of churches. But then you can look at certain Roman churches. They also have more contemporary services.
Yeah.
They have newer practices. Even a lot of their practices they got from Protestants. Like the what you think of as like the Roman collar that priests wear. I think that came from Presbyterians. Um, things like small group Bible studies. Those came from Lutheran pietists.
Mm.
It's like these things that you maybe associate with the more historical church, or yeah, these older things, they actually came from Protestants, like in the past few centuries, couple centuries.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's that illusion of continuity from the early church that it isn't really there when you look into the sources.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time, like what you're talking about, and this comes up a lot as well, and our conversations with people on the server, and also the interviews on my channel, which is a lot of the time, man, we're really pulled in by the aesthetics, right? And by
Mhm,
like you said, this feels ancient. This feels like they must have continuity. Why
mhm,
else would we have incense and these candles and these robes? And if we don't have continuity with the past, why do we look so much like the past? They may
mhm,
not say it exactly like that, but that's kind of like what ends up happening on the surface level. But it's honestly alarming to what degree that surface level aesthetic of the past really like just gets to people and it
yeah.
influences. I was talking to a guy the other day. I might mention it a different time on the channel, or I might not. I'll mention it now. A couple of days ago, we did uh, a guy that I met um, that has a ministry at one of our local colleges or local universities. We got together. We did a thing called Stump a Christian. Get a free cookie or whatever. Ask us your hard questions. And we didn't think it was going to be as successful as it was, but we had a ton of people come up. And there was one guy that came up and he was talking to that guy. And I'm finished. I'm wrapping up a conversation. I wrap it up and I just hear the word tradition. And I look over because the guy that I'm with doesn't really know church history or anything. And it was an Eastern Orthodox guy. And I was like, hey, what's going on? And he kind of like switches him over to me. And I'm talking to this guy. And he just opens up with like, man, yeah, I grew up like non-denominational, and I didn't find God in these smoke machines and in these flat screens and in like the pastor wearing skinny jeans. But
Mhm,
I found God in like the Eastern Orthodox Church. And I'm like, and we talked a little bit more than that, but the fact that was even the opener for me is like, it's like, okay, that now fair enough. If you don't, we don't. I'm not advocating for smoke machines, skinny jeans, and whatever else at church. But it's like, but when that's the opener, right? That's like
mhm.
that's the big realization moment for me. It's like, man, but have you ever considered that even with the incense and with the bells and with all the chanting, that they might be wrong, right? Like it's like, have you considered that? And that was one of those situations where even just pulling up, walking through some quotes from the church fathers, uh, guy came in super forceful, which I guess this we'll circle back to this later because that does a lot online. But dude was super forceful. It's like, do you submit to the Eastern Orthodox Church, objectively the first and original church, and all this stuff. And when I pull up actual quotes from the church fathers and the authority of the scriptures, even over themselves as church fathers and traditions, it was a great conversation, but the dude seemed kind of upset. I mean, the nicest way possible. At the end, he kind of like he didn't want to exchange phone numbers, didn't want to talk about it anymore, and then he ended up leaving. And I'm like, man, that's kind of telling, right? When the opener is, hey, it wasn't here. I found God in like the beauty of the Eastern Orthodox Church. But then when we get down to the nitty gritty of like, hey, but why don't we check out some of the things the church fathers have to say? Then suddenly like the narrative starts to unravel a little bit, you know?
Yeah, no, it is pretty crazy how often that's what gets people. I guess I had a just from our question list, I kind of talked about this on a different question later, so I might get into that more. But yeah, it's definitely probably the majority of the time that's how you see people converting to Rome or the East. It's just big, pretty churches, or
Yeah.
things that feel older. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
unfortunate.
And we'll talk more about that later, but again, it's fascinating because we look back at scripture and we see Jesus, uh, when he rebukes one of the many times he rebukes the Pharisees. One of the things that he tells them is that they're whitewashed tombs, right? And the
Mhm.
idea is that like they're really pretty on the outside, but on the inside they're full of dead men's bones. And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of really telling. But we'll circle back to that with one of our later questions here. So we covered a couple of the things that seemed really big and potentially compelling at the beginning, and then as it tends to be in a lot of these stories, right, where you look a little bit more into it and you're like, this actually isn't as legit as they're making it out to be. But what are, on the flip side of that, what are some of the claims of Rome that you're like, you never found that compelling? For you, it was like, man, in some crazy scenario where I become Roman Catholic, it would be in spite of this stuff, not because of it, you know? So what was that for you?
Yeah, I guess it's hard to say like things I instantly dismissed because I'm pretty open. Like I'm a fallible creature, so I'm gonna look into stuff at least a little bit, or give things a fair shot. But I guess something that always kind of never set right with me was that's the sort of cult of the saints and like the Marian dogmas.
Yep.
If just growing up reading the Bible, you're not seeing that anywhere. Like, like
Yeah.
Who's it? There's one statue you're supposed to like bury in your yard upside down so you can sell your house. There's like all these common practices. They kind of fly under the radar to like the general populace, but there's a lot of stuff that's pretty common. That is either nowhere in Scripture or seems to be spoken directly against in Scripture.
Yeah.
Or even very popular. I don't know if we're naming names, but there's a certain YouTuber that's very popular that I would call probably idolatry. And this is like I don't hear anybody speak against it. This is just like part of the culture.
Yeah. You know, without necessarily, I mean, we could, but maybe without even naming names, like on that channel, I've shown videos, and we're talking about like a channel where like you hear it's all pretty much almost all about just Mary, and you hear things about like consecrating your everything to Mary, like not even exaggerating, like actual videos talking about like, oh, maybe like when you brush your teeth, instead of just brushing your teeth, you're brushing your teeth while thinking about Mary, and you're consecrating that to Mary. And it's not like a tiny middle of nowhere like channel. This is like a well produced channel, and he has stuff where like I've shown like my best friend is one of my best friends is Roman Catholic, and I've shown him some of those videos, and even he goes like, well, I wouldn't necessarily phrase things like that, or I don't know that I would. Like to the point where even like if you force them to look at it, right? Some Roman Catholics would be like uncomfortable with it, but leave them to their own devices, and they're not going to say anything about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I mean, other people like Pastor Joshua Shuping has brought up some of the Eastern Orthodox prayers to Mary, and very similar ones exist on the Roman Catholic side. And the excuse you get is always like, "Oh, that's just hyperbole. That's just like a love poem." And yeah, we should love Mary. She's a significant to Christians, to Christianity. But when you look at these prayers, and you have some of the Roman Catholics and Orthodox calling them just hyperbole. It's just love language. But then you see like YouTubers and all the people that watch his content, all this like common practice, and they're doing exactly what those supposed hyperbole prayers are. There's a huge disconnect there.
Correcting it.
Yeah, that's the big thing. They're supposed to have this like firm ecclesial oversight, and it just never happens. Like it's not happening on the ground.
Yep. No, and you see prayers like you're saying to Our Lady of Perpetual Help. You see a lot of these prayers where it's like saying things like calling Mary your salvation, saying that you're entrusting your eternal soul to Mary. You have instances in prayers and Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox prayers where you hear things about like where Mary and Pastor Shuping does a great job highlighting these for the Eastern Orthodox side, where it's like you have these prayers where Mary is propitiating Jesus, right? Like Jesus is portrayed as like angry and unwilling to forgive. And it's like Mary, that's like the sweet mother figure that, like nudges Jesus into like, fine, I guess I'll forgive him because he's praying to you. And it's like, It's one of those things where I mean, I'm sure we could come up with a syllogism, and there's plenty of people in the past that have, and we could be a lot more ordered, I guess, if we were doing like a full-on systematic takedown of of Prayer to the Saints or the Cult of the Saints. But even just on a regular day-to-day level, some people can roll their eyes at this, but I really do think that at a certain point, right, if it walks like a duck and it looks like a duck and it sounds like a duck, and I guess in this instance you're praying to the duck for salvation and you're thinking the duck is going to make you be right with Jesus,
Yeah.
and then there's something a little bit weird about that duck, you know?
Yeah. So yeah, I just don't know how you can read the Bible and then see this stuff happening and just be cool with it or like brush over it. Um, I mean, there are some other practices that I mentioned, like verses that seem to specifically speak against certain practices, and that these aren't maybe a clear connection. You can dispute these, but stuff like forbidding marriage, I think clerical celibacy is something that in the Reformation they were really against. Um, it's we're created to be fruitful and multiply. Um, it seems that the apostles and people in the apostles' time were married as priests or pastors. Um, and I think forbidding that it would be a pretty major error, I'd say. Not necessarily like a heresy or something like that, but still, if something that's been in practice for so long, even though Scripture seems to be against it, but it's still just common practice.
Yeah, and that's something that I was reading. I'm going through Luther's Large Catechism with my wife as part of our devotional time, and when Luther talks about which of the commandments was he talking, it was probably the commandment on thou shalt not commit adultery. But where he talks a little bit about this, and it's like, man, when it comes to, for example, even like oaths, right, which was a big deal at the time. You have plenty of priests that are joining the Reformation, and it's like, what do we do with these oaths? And one of the arguments that Luther puts forth is like, well, God's command, right? God's direct commandment to you in Scripture overrides any kind of oath that you may have taken if the two come into conflict with each other, right? And the
Yeah,
idea is like when you look at the commands of Scripture, you even look at the way that Paul deals with things. Right? Yeah, Paul highlights, for example, how cool when someone is given the gift of singleness and celibacy, how cool that can be, and you can devote all your time to the ministry, and that's awesome. But then what does he say? That if you find yourself burning with lust, that you should get married. Right? That's like
right.
there doesn't seem to be any question. It's like either you have the gift, like Paul, where you can remain celibate and where you can devote all your time to the Lord and you're not burning with lust, or you're in this other category where you find yourself burning with lust and you should get married. But there doesn't
Mhm.
seem to be, there doesn't seem to be anything in Paul where, as he's talking about this, where he says, well, but you could be in a third category where you're burning with lust continually, but you've taken a vow of celibacy for some reason, and now you don't have to get married. Like we
Yeah,
don't hear any mention of this, right? And then it's like, man, to what degree does taking, like you're saying, even if it is we established this, it's like hundreds of years ago, and we it's a practice that we keep going. At which point in time do you look at Scripture and the wisdom of Scripture and the command of Scripture and say, like, well, I think Paul is saying this for a reason,
Mhm.
and maybe we shouldn't ignore it just because we have a custom that goes back, even if it goes back generations.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And even just in the qualifications for overseers and deacons, it's be the husband of one wife,
yeah,
and that people interpret that differently. I've even seen a Roman Catholic quoted this to me once, and his Bible said something like "must have only been married once." It's like like to change it so it's like you can't have been divorced, but
oh
like
man,
it's I think the plain reading with the right translation is you can't be like polygamous
yeah,
as an overseer.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, just changing
And
translations is yeah,
it even addresses having children, right? It says that that
yeah,
an overseer must have right control over his household, right? And if
yeah,
his household can't be out of control, and walking around doing all kinds of like public sin or whatever, and it's like, and I'm sure again, there's always a way that we can try to people can try to argue around these things and get away from these things, but it's like, man, there's only so many distinctions and sub distinctions that you can do, before it becomes apparent that we may have traditions of men that are starting to override the scriptures.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a big issue. Just look at what's happening on the ground, and then look at like plain reading without any any gymnastics. I mean, of course, context is important. Investigate reasoning, but if it's I don't know, it just seems clear to me on a lot of these things that they're just kind of trying to explain around justifying an error.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's true. And I think another level of that, which this kind of plays into, especially when you have a priest that maybe they are lonely and they desire to get married, they struggle with lust, and they find themselves in a situation where it's like, well, I guess I took an oath and now I can't get out of this mess. There seems to be, and you and I have talked about this plenty of times before, it's like there seems to be such a strange fascination with self-induced needless suffering in a lot of like the Roman Catholic tradition. You see like the other day I was listening to and I guess this name we can say because he's an apologist on the other side, but Christian B. Wagner, which I'll say ending because we see your name, like Kevin was saying earlier, Christian B. Wagner, the bit that I've seen of him, not on Twitter, most of what I've seen from him has been his Twitter account. What I've seen from him, he seems like a really smart guy. He seems like a guy that like lives, breathes, and eats theology, and fair enough. But something that comes up regularly for us, it's like this weird kind of fascination with just like, the Father said X, Y, or Z, and just because they did it, and that thing seems to like, it's some like, so it brings suffering on you. Like I've seen at one point talk about like, oh, this father said that dancing's bad, like people shouldn't dance, right? Or he was on a video with the other Paul recently where he mentions like it was a big dunk on the Eastern Orthodox that, oh well, he was, and I don't know how legitimate this is because I haven't studied this in depth, but where he tries to argue that like, oh well, actually when we look back at history, the Roman tradition, pastors that had wives, well, when they would become pastors, even the ones that had wives, not only did they never have marital relations again, but he would make her a nun and send her away forever. And it was like this big dunk for him. And I'm like, oh man, like talk about rejecting your vocation as a husband. Right? Like what are we talking about? It's like just because there were fathers that did X, Y, or Z, and just because X, Y, or Z brings suffering, that doesn't make it more pious than a practice than what the scriptures say.
Yeah, there's so much of that where I think if you look into the history of these things and kind of the culture at the time, it also becomes clear when these practices came in just through the culture or through some like misunderstanding, and then it becomes like the mainstream, other than scripture or the apostles or anything divinely commanded. It's just human, the the doctrines of men. It's And
in the early church, a lot of just the asceticism of men, right?
Mm-hmm.
and taken to an extreme. But all right, taking a little step away from, so we covered a little bit of the, what are some of the drawing points when we first look at Rome? What are some of the things that, even from the beginning, like you said, even when you keep an open mind, things that just do not seem convincing at all, right? What I kind of want to take us to now is what happens when you have all these things in mind, or the things that like are, man, I find this kind of alluring from Rome. I find this to be not convincing from Rome. And there's all these things that I don't really understand fully from Rome yet. And then you kind of take that to the internet, right? Things can get definitely a lot more hairy, and I think that's something that happens for pretty much any of us that are on the younger side of things and have been on the internet and take to these debates. Odds are we found out about this and we got really roped in by the online debate scene, whether that's on Twitter, whether that's in comment sections, like you said, whether that's on YouTube or Rumble or whatever it may be, right? We probably got roped in because of the internet, and that's just what you said happened to you, right? You were into apologetics. You kind of said you started fighting with people in comment sections, right? Sometimes even to this day. Thought it was a connection problem. We just had to take a small bathroom break. But that being said, so when you took all these things to the online debate scene, right? Like a lot of us have, and a lot of us kind of got introduced to this stuff. When you took to the online debate scene, whether it's in comment sections or watching these debates, like you were engaging with them, right? Between those of Protestant traditions, Lutherans and Roman Catholics, I'm sure, but also just other Protestants and Roman Catholics, and I guess these ecclesialist positions. What did you find in terms of like intellectual honesty in these debates? And I guess maybe you can comment a little bit on the difference between formal debates versus the common debates that happen on Twitter and in comment sections and stuff. And so what did you find as far as the intellectual honesty and the health of these debates?
Definitely in comment sections, it's pretty bad. I've pretty much given up that field. The only really use for engaging people in comments is if there's like blatant misinformation being spread. Then all it takes is like a link to disprove what they're saying, or if there's maybe an opportunity to like just get other people looking on to see refutation. If it's like a common maybe slander or a claim against your position, then it can be useful to just have that post-public refuting what they're saying. But you're pretty much never going to change someone's mind in the comment section. As for, I guess, more official debates, I guess that it's a little bit better. I'd say it's hard to find a Roman Catholic apologist who is both honest, well-informed on Protestantism, and open to like changing their views if they're proven wrong. You can find different pairings of those. There are a lot of honest, like really good people, but maybe they don't know much about Protestants. They haven't studied, like what Lutheranism is, or any of the traditions. They're just kind of going after general American evangelicals.
Where it's almost like where they think that Protestantism is like a denomination. And not what it is, which is like we have to repeat this at every opportunity. Just an umbrella term, right? The same way that like we said earlier, like the same way that monotheism is an umbrella term, but monotheism is not a religion, right? Like Protestantism is an umbrella term regarding the adherence to the five solas of the Reformation, and also ties to the actual Reformation itself, right? Historically, and it's a really useful umbrella. And doctrinally speaking, when in regards to the solas, it can be useful, but it's not a denomination. It's not an institution. And you're right. I think a lot of the time, even when you have well-meaning Roman Catholic interlocutors, if they just have not connected the dots on this issue and so many other issues, it just becomes a problem, because it's like they do a takedown of like, I don't know, like a Calvary Chapel type setting. And then it's like, we've destroyed Protestantism, and it's like, oh man, this is so unfortunate for anyone that's looking on either Roman Catholic or Protestant that doesn't know better on these issues,
Yeah, no, it's like I said, the combination of those three factors is very rare. I used to watch like a bunch of different apologists, but now it's down to maybe one or two that I'll consider seriously. And that's just through like watching a bunch of different people's content and seeing like stuff starts to come out. You see kind of when little tactics are being used. When they're clearly refuted on something, but they refuse to like drop that. When just totally losing on a point in a debate, and then you keep bringing that up in like future debates. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I would I guess it is better in the Christian apologetics than it is with, say, atheists and Muslims. I'd say that it's a bit better.
And that's what I was going to ask too, because for the both of us, it sounds like, before we got heavily into like the Roman Catholic polemics, right? We also just cared about apologetics in general. and being able to defend Christianity, like you're saying, from something like atheism or Islam, which are the two, I think, the largest amount of debates. You don't really see a lot of, I wonder where that is. You don't see a lot of like Hinduism versus Christianity debates, or or Buddhism versus Christianity. But you see a lot of Islam versus Christianity and atheism versus Christianity. And so I would wonder for you, and then I can give maybe a little bit of my take on this. Do you see any parallels between like the kind of tactics and the kind of like, or maybe not just tactics, but just in the dialogues between Christians and atheists or Christians and Muslims and that of Protestants and Roman Catholics?
Yeah, I think a major thing is even just in the debate topic that people agree to. Say
Yep.
like, if every debate you're taking only puts you on the offensive, like you're never having to defend your own views, you're always just attacking the other side. That happens a lot, especially with atheists. They'll like never try to defend their own like philosophical presuppositions, like anything like that. It's always prove your God is real. Like
yeah.
It's always putting the proof on you. And this, you'll see this with Roman Catholics a lot too. Not all the time, of course, but it's very, very common.
And to your point on that, and that's something that is just so hard to catch unless you're just big into debates, right? And that's like the resolution in a formal debate, right? Especially when it's like, to point out like a specific on this, the one where this happens most flagrantly is with sola scriptura, right? Where it's like, why is it that like in almost every, and not, technically I guess not at all, but in almost every single debate on the topic, the resolution is somehow putting the burden of proof squarely on the Protestant, right? It's almost never the other way around. It's almost never like, oh no, the Roman Catholics are going to build up capital T tradition, and they're going to build up apostolic succession. They're going to build it up, and then the Protestants' job is to take that down. That happens every once in a while. I think in one of James White's famed debates from the 90s that I always reference. They were my gateway into this stuff. I believe he got, I don't know if it was Jerry Matitix, I think. I could be wrong, to try to defend that, but you don't see that very often. And I think the same way, like you're saying, with an atheist, they're like, prove to me that theism makes sense. Prove to me that God is. And there's a place for that, but it gets kind of absurd when you reach a place where you're like, okay, great. That was our last 50 debates. But are you like ever going to try to rationalize like materialism for me? Are you ever going to try to rationalize like, give me a theory of morality that makes any sense without God? Like, what's going on here? And I think a lot of the time we're like, oh man, like maybe I'm struggling, and the guy that I was rooting for in that debate, the Protestant, like he seemed to be on his back foot. I honestly think like you have to be a stellar debater, or like a phenomenal debater, when you're the one that is being attacked. If a resolution is set up in such a way where you're the only one that has to bear the burden of proof and evidence, you can do a great job, and there's plenty of people to do, but it's so much harder to do that well and to come out looking strong than it is to just attack and poke holes.
Yeah. Well, it just takes more effort to refute a claim than to just throw out a claim. So yeah, it's just a totally uneven balance there. There's so much of just assuming your side like as the default. Like you can't give into the other side's paradigm that they started first, and then you came along and you have to defend why people should change. It's an atheist isn't just like a blank slate. They have their own beliefs, whether they'll admit it, but philosophical beliefs, what they believe about the world, creation, existence. Don't just cede that ground. You have to make them prove their side too.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And that's where I always tell. It's actually funny. I was teaching this to our to my youth group at the church I'm working at this past Wednesday, where when we're talking about like the most basics of like even just biblical hermeneutics, right? Like one of the most basic intro level things that we have to like get in our heads is like, man, as you're reading the text, ask good questions of the text, right? It's like if you just sit there and you read it a lot, like that's cool. At least you're reading it. Like we've already made it to step one. But step two, to really understand it, to be able to apply it to your life, to be able to connect it to the rest of Scripture, it's like you have to ask good questions. And you have to ask questions of it regarding context. You have to ask questions regarding the way it fits in with other passages. And that's the case for biblical hermeneutics, but that's the case also just for understanding anything. Right? It's like we gotta actually ask good questions. And part of those good questions, like you're saying, it's not just, oh, I guess I'm just gonna assume you're the default. No. Like ask like, wait, why should you be the default? Right? What actually makes your clock tick? Well, what makes it actually work? This thing that you're proposing. And we need to be able to ask good questions of the other side. Otherwise, it's very easy when you're in a situation where you're just watching these debates. And you're watching debates, like we said, in a situation where it's always your guy that's on the defense. It's always your guy. And then you get to a point where you're like, man, maybe it is easy to poke holes. Well, hold on. Like, stop for a second and then ask, wait a minute. What does the other side even believe? What are they arguing? And what happens if we try to poke holes in that, right? And is there a much bigger hole in that side of the equation that there is, hypothetically, if they succeed on mine?
Yeah, that's huge. I guess there's a lot of tactics in debate. It's not just information versus information. People will choose topics. They'll choose debate styles they're better at. There's a lot that goes in that's not just fact versus fact, and you have to kind of watch out for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like you said at the opener of our video here, which is, man, a lot of people hate on debates. I love debates because, like you said, we get to see ideas square off against each other. But to really get the most out of a debate, you have to keep in mind what you're saying, which is this isn't just a spreadsheet, another spreadsheet. It's like, well, hopefully there's the equivalent of that in the mind of each debater, but that's also being filtered through their ability to argue and through their ability to be rhetorically effective. And that stuff can be cool. It can be engaging. But if you don't know how to look past that, it can also be really distracting off of the real point. And so speaking of tactics, right? What are some of the common tactics that you see often employed online by Roman Catholic apologists? And maybe not just like the named apologists, but even by like, I guess what we'll call like layperson apologists on comment sections on Twitter that create doubt in Protestants, right? And that create what we call ecclesial anxiety, right? About, oh no, am I in the right church? Like, what are some of these tactics that you see them employ to achieve that end?
Yeah, one thing you mentioned this a couple of times is the Protestant umbrella. You can kind of throw an attack at Protestantism, and then if it happens to not apply to a certain Protestant, then you just kind of dodge again and be like, well, you're so divided you can't even agree, so it's an attack on Protestants. So it's I mean, like being Lutheran, it's like 95% of their attacks on Protestants don't even apply to us. So then that makes it easier for me.
That's one of the funniest things where it's like Protestants believe, and they're just describing like a Calvinistic like Baptist.
Yeah.
And then you're like, all right.
So it's like you don't baptize your babies. You don't have the real presence in the Eucharist. You don't have high church. You don't have pretty churches. Like any of that. You have to. I like what say like the other Paul we both know. He's been advocating for not just defending Protestantism, but defending like your own tradition. And I think that can be really useful in for one, it kind of forces the other side to learn what they're attacking. You can't just attack one thing you've heard of and then claim that covers the whole umbrella. You have to figure out the actual positions of the other side. But yeah, it avoids this dodging tactic where they can just kind of come at multiple angles, just randomly throwing stuff.
Yeah. No, well, and to double up and commend what you're saying, like, please, if you're someone at home that's like watching this and maybe you're considering Roman Catholicism or you're experiencing some of this anxiety about where you are, ask yourself, well, A, what Protestant tradition are you a part of? Are you a Reformed Baptist? Are you a Lutheran? Are you a Presbyterian? Are you an Anglican? Are you a Reformed Anglican? Or are you an Anglo-Catholic? Are you a whatever it may be? Ask yourself what tradition you are, and then ask yourself, wait a minute, how many of these critiques that I'm worried about have been about Protestantism? How many of them have been dealing with my actual tradition? Because you might find that maybe you might have misconceptions, right, of your own tradition. Maybe you don't know your own tradition, or it may be that like you're mentioning earlier, Kevin. It's like a lot of these things may not even apply if you actually like look at what your tradition has to offer. And I do think that there's a value, and I mentioned this to Paul before. I think there's a value to defending the umbrella, right? Like, for example, I think there's a value in defending monotheism against polytheists, right? I think there's a value to that. But the same way that defending monotheism doesn't automatically get you to the cross, which is the most important thing. Defending Protestantism, if we just leave it there, doesn't really bring us to the end goal, which is like, no, I mean, presumably, because Protestant is not a denomination, it's an umbrella term, we exist at one of the various finish lines. And hopefully, if we're at that finish line, it's because we think that it's true. And so just defending Protestantism doesn't do anything when we need to really be defending our tradition and our specific flag that we're staking in the vast land that is Protestantism. And to the point that you were making as well about this unity and the claims that are made about that. And I've said it before on the channel, and we've said it a million times to people, but it bears repeating every time. And that is, do not get tricked into thinking or being told, rather, that you should expect institutional unity from a thing that's not an institution. That doesn't make any sense, right? We don't go look for wives and husbands at like a bachelor convention, right? Like that doesn't that's not what it's for. That's not what they're there for. And so like Roman Catholicism is an institution with a hierarchy and with a structure and with official doctrine. Protestantism is not an institution; it's an umbrella. And so when Roman Catholics say, "Look at our unity," which maybe we can talk about in a second, that those claims are also hyped up and and trumped up way too much. But even sometimes they do that, right? And they're like, "Man, look at our unity and look at your disunity in this thing that is not even an institution. It's not supposed to have this institutional unity." And that gets very goofy. And I think if people understand that and they compare, wait a minute. Instead of comparing Roman Catholicism to Protestantism, let me compare Roman Catholicism to the Southern Baptist Convention. Let me compare Roman Catholicism to the LCMS. Let me compare Roman Catholicism to the AALC. Let me compare Roman Catholicism to my Anglican, my Presbytery, if I'm a Presbyterian. And once we do that, I think a lot of these arguments and a lot of the, whoa, they're so united versus us, we're so disunited, or we're so not united. I think a lot of that kind of like melts away, right?
No, yeah, it's just the classic apples to apples and not apples to oranges. You have to be careful for these like false categories. It's I don't know, like you were saying, you have to like know your own tradition first of all. Yeah. It's you aren't. There's merit in defending, let's say, the five solas. If you want to defend Protestantism, then that would be kind of the grounding to work from. Yep. But then, if you're going to do that, make sure you stick to whichever sola you're discussing, and don't let them like swerve off into back to that umbrella. It's stick to like specific topics that can be fairly compared, like equally compared, and see how they square off.
Yeah. Oh, and also, I'll add to that too. Sometimes even if you know your tradition really well, the way that a Lutheran will defend justification by faith alone, in some fundamental ways will be the same as other Protestants, but in some very key ways, it'll also be different than the way that a Reformed person would defend justification by faith alone, than a way that an Arminian would defend justification by faith alone. These differences matter. Right. And it may be, and I think I've told you this before, and it's something that I'm getting in the habit of saying, right. Even for that, and I guess this might be another piece of advice too, for Protestants at home dealing with these things, along with what you're saying is, man, don't be just caught off guard by like one-liners and by like these things like, oh, to be deep in history, cease to be Protestant. Okay, dude, whatever. Like what? Like what does that actually mean? You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. And like even with that claim, for example, where I was going at with that is like it's something that I'm getting in the habit of saying. It's like, man, it may be that to be deep in history may be to cease to be certain kinds of Protestant, but it may not cease to be all kinds of Protestants. Right. And so it may be that like maybe you're defending one of the solas, you're defending justification for faith alone. And you find that in your particular tradition, wow, my arguments don't really work against theirs. But then you look at some other Protestant traditions and you're like, wait a minute, the way that they're arguing or their understanding of justification for faith alone is so robust that the Roman Catholics just, their arguments bounce off of it. And I think that's important too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you said, it's I mean, a Presbyterian and Lutheran both believe in infant baptism, but for very different reasons. Or even a Lutheran and a Roman Catholic both believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, but in very different ways. So
Yeah.
it's you have to make these distinctions clear.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. So we've covered then a little bit of, what are some of the tactics that we see employed online? What are some of the tips and stuff that we would give people at home and ways that we ourselves like to try to stay on our toes? Not that we're perfect or anything, right? Like I'm sure we can fall to rhetoric and stuff too. But when it comes to, when these tactics aren't applied properly, or when sometimes people are just caught off guard, right? And they're inundated with, coming home network videos. They're inundated by people online telling them, hey, come home to Rome, come home to Rome. They're inundated by all these grandiose claims and they don't know where to start. A lot of the times it's really easy to be swept up by that.
Mhm.
And I think we're seeing, at least from our vantage point in the circles that we run in, I think we're seeing an increasing number of conversion rates to Rome nowadays, online and in the real world. Maybe not necessarily a general trend that goes out to like the general population, or I think that might still be going in the opposite direction. But at least among like theological circles, I'm starting to see online very often that someone starts getting to theology and then they run into Rome and that's it. Like they're just swimming the Tiber immediately. And so, I mean, why do you think it is that so many Protestants do that, right? They're like they find themselves enthralled and that's it. They just jump right in.
Well, so there's one trend that's kind of like this rad trad, or just,
Yeah.
I mean, that's maybe kind of the worst of it, but just general traditionalism, which that word doesn't mean something bad. It's just what I'm calling the trend. But I think there's sort of a pushback against modernity. There's just a lot of cultural things are happening that people don't like, people who are more traditional. But they run into the error of thinking that because something looks older, that it's better, or even that it goes back to the apostles.
Yeah.
But this can be like, it's not always the case. You might have a hymn that was written in the last century, but it sounds like it's from like 1400. So you'd rather have that hymn than, I don't know, some contemporary music, even though they're both from the same century.
Yeah.
It's just this one feels older, so it's better, or it feels more apostolic. You get this with, I mean, even in Lutheranism, you have people who are very attached to the Reformation era hymns, and they'll always choose those over something that was written in the past, I don't know, 20 years. But that's not apostolic. That's from I don't know, 1540. There's no one really trying to go back to the first century to get what's really the oldest, like from the apostles. You have, I mean, Eastern Orthodox will maybe claim that, but their tradition really kind of starts in, I don't know, the 8th century, something like that, 9th century.
Yep.
That's where a lot of their stuff is tethered. But since it's older than what you see, it must be the oldest. And yeah, it's a huge error people make.
Yeah, and when you compound that with what we've been kind of saying throughout, when you compound that with unfortunately taking people at their word.
Mhm.
And when you compound that with, you know, not researching because, for lack of a better term, it passed the vibe check, like, like you were like, yeah, it seems right to me. Like you're saying, it seems old to me. So I guess and I trust the person that's saying it. They seem pretty confident as they say it. I think, yeah, I think we just end up with a lot of, unfortunately, just uncritical attitudes toward these claims. I think a lot of the times people don't realize also the severity of of the stuff that they're being sold. Right? I mean, these are big claims, and obviously Rome and the East are different when it comes to, for example, salvation outside their tradition. Right? Rome,
Mhm.
at least today, right, affirms that we're separated brethren. The East doesn't think that, and sometimes people will just jump into the East, and I'm like, well, what does that say about, especially if you're going to do it uncritically, like you just heard some intro level apologetics and now you're forsaking everything.
Mhm.
Man, it's like you're, by doing that, you're claiming that all of your friends and family that are members of your church are not saved. You're claiming that the pastors that brought you the gospel, that brought you to, that the Lord used to bring you to the faith, that they're not saved, right? Or even if let's say you don't take it that far, you're going to jump over to the Roman Catholics. Well, you don't believe that these guys are pastors at all, right? It's like you're denying their ordination, right? Like it's like a lot of the times I think it's what you're saying. It's, man, this stuff passes the vibe check. It seems very we're forming, and Sean touched on this from Anglican Aesthetics, where he talks about like the power of meta narrative. Right? It's like this meta narrative starts forming of like, wow, these guys are ancient. Well, they claim to go back to the apostles. This stuff seems really old to me. It sounds really cool. I'm not, especially if you don't come from like a high church liturgical background. Whoa, this seems like really cool and different. And then you just got swept up by this stuff without considering what it means, the implications of it for your friends and family, the implications of it for your own faith. Um, even for some of the things that we talked about earlier, like things that are dangerous, things like idolatry, right? Things like works righteousness. These are things that are dangerous.
Mhm.
And sometimes I feel like people get so caught up in the meta narrative. The meta narrative just like it gets so loud that it drowns out everything else.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of probably just ecclesial anxiety people have um, in these online spheres of apologetics. There are people who are just constantly switching denominations.
Yeah,
Though, it's even some of the bigger apologists have been through like 5 different churches
yeah,
in the matter of a handful of years. Um, like, you can't be making such huge decisions in such little time. It's kind of stay where you are, like learn your current tradition like solidly. Um, Compare to others, learn what they're saying too. Uh, we all have to make these decisions of
hmm
ultimately where we're gonna be, what we belong to, and you can't just be jumping between things.
yeah. And again, and that goes back to, man, like even jumping between things. It's like that's a lot of heartache, especially for people that are like, maybe they're not so young that they're single and no one cares what they're doing. Yeah, sometimes these people have like families. They have children that are being reared up in the faith. They have spouses that are looking after their spiritual health. And it's like, man, we need to consider. I mean, we need to consider our neighbor, right? So, like, we need to consider the truth of the gospel and the scriptures, but also as a further incentive to be careful and be wise and take things slow. We need to consider the spiritual health of our closest neighbors, right? Of our family and of our friends, and it's not conducive to their spiritual health for us to have this lack of consistency all the time. Anyway, and it's one thing if there's a major change from one tradition to the other after you understood the topics, you understood what's going on, you see the issues. But it's what you're saying. It's like when it's like several almost like rapid fire changes over several years. It's like, man, that has a toll on people around you, and especially those that may be counting on your ability to be reliable spiritually. You know?
Yeah, it makes you seem insincere or
Yeah,
brash, or it's not a good
yeah,
look.
yeah, absolutely. And so, That being said, kind of taking things away a little bit from just the online debate scene and to more of like a ministerial context, right? Since I'm not right now serving as a pastor, but I am ordained as a pastor right myself, and I've been a pastor for almost 4 years before I moved a few states, and now I'm back in my home state, working in a different capacity at a church plant. But for me being a pastor, and for you, right, because you're an up and coming theology student, right? You're studying to, Lord willing, enter the ministry in some capacity as well, hopefully, as a pastor. And so, from your perspective, what do you think pastors should do to help equip lay people to be able to engage and think carefully through these topics?
Yeah, I think in terms of Lutheranism, the main thing is not to neglect the background of the confessions.
Yeah.
It's all throughout the confessions. It's not just like a bullet points of this is what we believe. It's also giving the background, the context of like we reject this and this like heretical belief of these other groups. It's these false beliefs are being associated with the Lutheran movement, so that they're writing against those. It's also talking about the abuses of Rome. So you have to include all of this when you're catechizing, either middle schoolers or adults, whoever. Just if you're teaching the confessions, also teach them everything it says. And there's a lot that it says about what's going on at the time, the history of the church, just certain abuses that are going on and how they're responding to those. I think that's important to just showing like where Rome came from. Even it's giving another perspective on their history and why the Reformation happened. That's important to just teaching what we believe and why.
Yeah, and again, if we would look for context, and again, like we were talking earlier, doing basic biblical hermeneutics, why would we stop doing that when it comes to our confessions of faith or what's, or the things that were, why would we strip that from the context of why it was written and when it was written and who wrote it? And I think you're right. I was gonna make a joke, like presumably you'd say for anyone that's not a Lutheran, become a Lutheran now. That's step one of dealing properly with Rome. No. But I will say for me, even like to nod at my Book of Concord, which is back there somewhere. Even for the Book of Concord, even if you're not a Lutheran, I say give it a read. The amount of church father quotations that you find, the amount of argumentation that is just steeped in the Bible and the church fathers. Whether that ends up with you going on the Lutheran route, or whether it doesn't, at least it's a good example of something that you can look at, and that I myself have been looking at as far as how to incorporate biblical argumentation and patristic argumentation. I also think I would add to what you're saying, whether you're a Presbyterian and you need to learn your confessions, whether you're a Reformed Baptist, you need to learn your confessions. Everyone should be learning their confessions and why those were made. I would also add, to build on what I was saying a second ago, just for me personally, and something that I want to do even with my students here at my church. I'm kind of looking at the youth group, and Lord willing, in January, as I try to put together a college group at our local university and stuff, that once we are ready to take a little bit of the training wheels off, like once everyone understands what the gospel is, and you've hit a lot of the basics, it's so useful to, I feel like, to even just inform people about who the church fathers are. If you're teaching a class, and to be able to just something as simple as incorporating quotes from the church fathers into what you're doing, I think is actually so powerful. Because one of the big things for me, being raised a Southern Baptist, is, to be honest, up until like a few years ago when I started looking at this stuff, I had heard of St. Augustine. I hadn't even heard really the term church father. That's something that I had to learn. That's kind of a big deal, right? It's like we need to be familiar with who church fathers are. We need to be familiar with people from the Middle Ages, people from the early church. It's like, this matters. And I think if we're going to teach our people, one of the most practical ways to, I think, prepare them to deal with Rome is what you're saying: teach the confessions, teach the context, because a lot of the context of the Reformational confessions have to do with rejecting Rome. That's super important already. But also on a much more subtle level, just if your people are hearing the word church father all the time, if your people are hearing quotes by Athanasius, they're hearing quotes from First and Second Clement, if they're hearing quotes from all of these different guys, from John Chrysostom, if they're hearing this repeatedly, then suddenly when a Roman Catholic shows up and says, "Oh, actually, did you know that all these guys believe what I believe? Let me name you a few names." Suddenly, your people may be like, "Oh, I know that guy. My pastor quotes him all the time." Right? It's like,
Yeah.
what's the point? And I think that has a really practical power to it as well. You know?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think another important thing with church history is we think of it as just like these councils. It's just these like official documents or maybe official letters. But when I read, we went through Augustine's Confessions for one of my church history courses, and
Right.
reading that really makes church history more personable. Like
Mhm.
it's kind of like his diary, like his journal.
Yeah.
It's not just like rigid bullet points or anathemas. You're seeing into his thoughts, and he is a real person. And it's not just, I don't know, these quotes you can pull out of context and throw at
Yeah.
somebody.
Yeah.
These are people that you have to get to know and understand, like in what they're saying.
Yeah. And I think, and that's so big too, right? Because on the practical level, like applying this to the conversations that we have in this sphere, it's like once you understand that these are people, and once you, on the layperson level, if you've read your confessions, you hear the confessions, and the guys that wrote the confessions talk about the church fathers all the time. If your pastor talks about the church fathers all the time, he utilizes their quotes. If maybe your church is an annual or whatever, like church history class, and maybe you hear a little bit about who these guys were, who these men, something about these men's like biographies and lives, then suddenly when someone's like, I guess to make a callback to what we were talking about earlier, but someone's like, "Did you know that some church fathers didn't like dancing?" And you can kind of go like, I mean, okay, right? But they're like a guy from like the fourth century, or from the
Yeah,
fifth. Like, it's like I respect them and they're awesome and I respect their insight, but also like they're people, and they're people that are fallible, and they're people that can have their own preferences, that have their own. They were raised a certain way, people that existed in a particular historical and cultural context,
mhm.
and they and that affects them too. It affects the way that they think too, you know.
Yeah. And
And so
if no one can even figure out when the Pope is speaking infallibly, then when are all these church fathers speaking infallibly?
yeah,
It's when is
yeah,
this just their personal opinion? When Yeah, it's when can you trust what they're saying is what everyone else believed?
yeah. That's a good point too. And so with that, right, thinking a little bit about, I kind of like in these interviews when we talk about the past, also then kind of pulling us to the present, right? And so we talked about a little bit about, man, we have to be looking at the church fathers. We should be looking at our confessional documents. Maybe I would add on there, if it wasn't apparent from us talking about the confessional documents, reading the reformers, right? These are the guys that kind of like are the guys that kicked off the Reformation. It might be a good idea to see what they have to say about Rome. But pulling it to the modern day, right? Who are some of your favorite Protestant voices in the modern day in this debate?
So I've a kind of big list here. Uh, I guess I'll go through at least the main ones.
Sure,
So like Dr. Jordan Cooper has been a big one.
he's awesome.
Um, he's kind of one of the bigger names that goes into church history and directly addresses Rome and the East. Um, and then Dr. Ortland, he's also been huge. The kind of those two are maybe the biggest
Yeah,
right now in kind of bringing church history to this sphere. Um, I've really liked Brian Wolfmueller is great
yeah,
for he's a lot more pastoral in just kind of presenting the gospel to you, and it's through a Lutheran lens, but it doesn't feel like that. It's like he's just genuinely presenting
yeah, he's
the
awesome.
gospel and giving you like Bible lessons. He'll pull out note cards and step by step explain everything. Um,
He also has a couple of really chill, but in my opinion, like robust discussions with people from ecclesialist traditions. Like, I really liked it. He had a discussion on justification, debate / discussion. They were super friendly the whole time. It was him and Reason and Theology Live. I don't know why I just blanked out on his name. Michael Law.
Yeah.
And that one was really good. So he's super like Brian Wolfmueller's awesome. He's super friendly, like you said, super pastoral, but he also brings some really good information. He has some good like theological and debate chops, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think he's kind of a secret weapon. Like in
straight up.
If you're just trying to bring like a Lutheran view to some online community, then sending him or videos of him is kind of one of the secret weapons, I'd say. There's also a pastor, Marcus Williams. He's another Lutheran, a bit smaller channel, but he's started getting involved in this area. Pastor Will Whedon, he's really great for, I mean, anything theology. A lot of people might know him from, is it Matt Whitman?
Yeah.
His channel. He does like church tours, and one he did with Will Whedon. It's like pastor tours of Lutheran church, and there you see kind of the just all the theology that goes into a Lutheran liturgy, and even the building, and kind of just the passion behind like a solid Lutheran teaching.
He's super passionate, and also I guess for anyone at home that may be struggling with specifically Eastern Orthodoxy, he has like a two-parter of his testimony on because he almost went to the East. Like, he was already like telling people, his elders at his church, he was communicating with higher ups. I think he's part of the LCMS, right? Yeah, in the LCMS, where he was communicating like, I'm leaving, like I'm going. Assuming that the phosphorus, or I don't know what we would call it, but he was going to the East, and he ended up not doing it. And his story is really cool. I listened to it a couple days ago, so I would recommend Will Whedon for sure, as far as hearing someone out for why they almost left and they didn't.
No, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I had that noted to mention that somewhere. It's I'll actually mention that probably in a little bit too. But yeah, I also like the Scholastic Lutherans channel. They're all laymen, but they're very well studied in Scholastic Lutheranism, pretty much just between the Reformation and today. There's a lot of history. You tend to just look at, I mean, Luther, Melanchthon, Chemnitz, but there's multiple generations that have tons of works, and these guys are a good source for that. And then I'll maybe just list off the rest.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know if you ever did this, but for me especially, when like someone's listing resources, I'll just straight up like, and so I've done this so many times in videos. I'm just like writing it all down as it gets listed off. But
yeah, totally. Yeah, just kind of what I could remember quickly was Theosophical Wanderings, Barely Protestant, Father James, Anglican Aesthetics, The Other Paul, Goy for Jesus, and then you have like Anthony Rogers, Steve Christie, Ryan Reeves is really good for he has great documentaries on different church history stuff from like year zero till today. And then Ancient Paths TV has some really good documentaries. He had one about Eastern Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
He has a less well known one about Rome.
Yeah, sorry, I always forget to mention him, but his stuff is great.
Yeah.
Really good. Ancient Paths TV for sure.
Yeah, there are way more I could mention. I'm sure I'm forgetting major ones that influenced me, but yeah, those are good.
Even though he may have some takes that I don't agree with, and a lot of us may not agree with, regarding things like divine simplicity and a couple other things, or the very specifics of that, I will say, like I said earlier, man, James White just holds a special place in my heart, because he was like Protestant apologist that I ran into. And as much as, it's like a meme now, man, he brings up his debates from the 90s all the time. And I bring it up all the time too, because it's just funny to me. It's like a meme. But honestly, those debates, even if you don't agree with everything that he says, he put a lot of research and work into those debates. And those are pretty good.
Yeah, I don't know how. I was thinking about him when I made this list too, but I just didn't
Oh, really?
remember. Yeah, he's really, for just direct challenging Roman Catholicism, he's, yeah, one of the top for sure.
And he gets flack for being too aggressive, but sure, maybe he can be at times for some people's taste, but I think there's a place I think there's a place for definitely Irenicism and, like, for example, Gavin Ortland's approach. Love Gavin's approach and just always aiming at peace, always being meek and that's awesome. But I think when you're engaged in any kind of war of any sort, whether it's a literal war out in the world or whether it's a theological war, a war of ideas, it's good. As long as obviously we're all playing fair and things are being done with proper intention and motive, I think there's always a place for very meek approaches to things, and there's also a place for diversity of tactics and being more direct and maybe more abrasive. And I think James White does a good job filling that side of things.
Definitely.
So yeah, so now as we kind of come to a close, I have the final kind of two questions I'd like to ask everyone when we do interviews like this. So, going back to your story, right? Like you said, you're a cradle Lutheran. From your perspective, you say, man, the Lord gave me the gift of faith at my baptism as a child, and I've been Lutheran ever since, right? The desire to convert to something new never took hold of you. You never swam any kind of, I guess, river that's named for taking you anywhere. It's another tradition, right? You never went anywhere else besides Lutheranism. And so, what about being a Lutheran do you find to be unique, right? What is uniquely special about it in comparison to other traditions? And why did that lead you to stay Lutheran?
Yeah, I guess one of them is how we do hermeneutics. I mean, people joke about us just going to mystery all the time, but we're not we're not afraid to, like, take two verses that seem to contradict, and then not really favor one over the other. You just say these are both true. Like, I might not know how. I mean, a lot of these apparent contradictions are not really contradictions, and you can fully explain how they are not. But say with, like, a hypostatic union, like, there are these divine mysteries that we won't be able to understand in this life. So Lutherans aren't afraid to say that. Like, we just take God's word as what it says, and we don't have to, like, write multiple volumes of books explaining why it is all the time. um, I'd say going back to your reference to Will Wheaton.
Mm-hmm.
So the title of that video was, I think, Why Stay Lutheran? It's all about conscience. And you see this time and time again, that even starting with Luther, he really struggled with his conscience. Whether he's really saved, whether he's confessed enough, whether he's done enough. And Lutheranism really focuses on consoling people who are struggling with that. It's I think the focus on justification, that it's all externos, it's outside of you. It's not because of your works. Just basic sola fide, sola gratia. It's all a gift to you from God, paid for by Christ. There's nothing you have to do to save yourself or to earn God's love. There's something specific about just consoling consciences that I think Lutherans focus on more than a lot of other traditions.
Yep, fair enough. And I would say, as someone that, again, I've been spending quite a bit of time now, as you all know, like, trying to read the Book of Concord and just looking at Dr. Prot Debate Cooper and Brian Wolfmueller and a lot of Lutherans, and so I have a lot of respect for the Lutheran tradition, for sure. And so, that being said, as we have come here to the end of our interview, what is a final word that you would like to give to any Roman Catholics maybe listening that may be considering Protestantism, and then number two, any Protestants that may be listening and they're struggling with ecclesial anxiety, maybe they're considering jumping over to Rome?
Yeah, I guess for the Roman Catholics, this goes for everybody, but I'd say learn how to like put on other lenses. There's a lot of kind of paradigms we adopt, like glasses you put on, and that's how you see everything all the time. And you have to kind of learn how to put on other glasses, look at things from a different view, a different paradigm. Um, it's like when you're looking at church fathers, don't just be like, "Oh, he said succession." Oh, it's there are different meanings to words in different times, and kind of putting on different lenses can open you up to seeing where it might be used differently. Um, for Protestants, and again for everybody, there's too much info out there. There's an infinite amount of studying that can be done into church history, into scripture. It's never ending, and you can't do it alone. So I guess when you're deciding between traditions, I think probably every denomination has kind of core claims that you
Mm.
can focus on, where if those are disproven, then everything else fails. So it's instead of trying to learn everything and be an expert on everything, just focus on those core claims, identify them, and then see if they hold up. That's I guess how I was kind of able to not be concerned after. I mean, it took a couple years to make sure I was kind of solidly doing due diligence, but yeah, I'd say
Yeah.
that's
I,
kind of summarizes.
honestly, I don't even have anything to add. I think that was great advice. I think that's yeah. I think we've covered a little bit of everything. Honestly, I think for me, a lot of these videos are. I ask myself the question, like, man, what are the resources? What are the things that I wish I had heard like straight away when when I was dealing with these things?
Hmm.
And I think if I had received that advice, I think that would have made a pretty big difference very early on. And so,
Yeah.
all right, Kevin, I really appreciate you for coming on the channel. I'm really happy we were able to make this happen. I was looking forward to this interview like all week once, once we set it up. And
Mhm.
so thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else that you want to tell anybody at home?
No, thanks for having me. I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on, and hopefully we'll have you on again in the future.
Yeah.
See ya.